The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 5. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 5, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to education, providing free school lunch and breakfast for students, the first engrossment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Jordan, to explain her bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Minnesota is a state that truly values education, and every member of this body wants to see every child in Minnesota succeed. But unfortunately, we as a state fall short of creating equal opportunities for all students without exception. And in a state with an agricultural tradition as rich as ours, it is particularly unacceptable that any child go hungry. House File 5 would provide universal school meals to Minnesota students, ensuring they have access to a breakfast and a lunch each day they're in school. We know hunger is something that too many students bring with them to their classrooms, and the current status quo is letting Minnesota school children go hungry. 1 in 4 students experiencing food insecurity come from families that do not qualify for existing nutrition programs in our schools. That's not helping them learn. It's not helping them be the best version of themselves, and it's not helping them learn what they need to do to achieve their dreams. Not only does this bill help out those students and their families, but all families will benefit from this program. Members, this is a bill that would cut costs at a time when food costs are rising. When life is chaotic, families will know that a meal is waiting for their child. To get down to it, this bill establishes no-cost breakfast and lunch for all students attending schools participating in the National School Lunch Program. It also enrolls qualifying schools into the Federal Community Eligibility Program, or CEP. CEP is a federal program that provides universal no-cost meals at schools in high-poverty neighborhoods. Many students in these neighborhoods already come from families eligible for SNAP and other assistance programs. And this bill also appropriates money to MDE to get going on the startup so that students can be ready to be greeted with breakfast on day 1 this fall. As part of the federal government's response to the pandemic, the USDA provided free meals to all students regardless of income through the end of the 2021-2022 school year. And while federal support did not continue into this current school year, several states, including California, Nevada, Vermont, and Massachusetts, have continued funding free meals for all students out of their state budgets. Minnesota can and should join them. Members, this is a good bill. This is a bill that feeds kids, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
The member from Morrison, Representative Kresha, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Madam Speaker, with this bill, I noticed in the fiscal note that there's a local impact, and I'm wondering if we have district runs available for this.
Representative Kresha, I think you could ask the Chair of Education Finance to yield, but that is not a parliamentary inquiry. Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the Chair, Joachim, would you yield?
She will yield. Representative Kresha.
And Madam Speaker, Chair Joachim, do we have district runs for this yet?
Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Kresha, could you repeat? I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Representative Kresha.
Do we have district runs available for this yet?
Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Kresha, we have a fiscal note, which is what we need to do to make the decision here tonight. District runs, I did talk to Mr. Strom, and he's explained this too, and we explained in committee, that is not something that can be ascertained right now because the 2022 numbers aren't back from what was spent, and we don't know what amount of, it's a reimbursement plan. It's not a run like our other categoricals. So when you do a reimbursement plan, the process is different, and you true up the books the next year after things go out. So districts runs would not make any sense to folks right now because we don't know what school districts are going to be charging or opting out. Districts can opt out of this. We don't know the uptake for CEP. Representative Jordan's even more informed than I am on this, but today, for instance, in education finance, we had a modeling for a what if with the CTE funding, because that's also a reimbursement plan. So no, we do not have what you would typically call district runs. It's not a categorical. It doesn't have levy interaction.
Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Chair Joachim. I know you're trying to be very thorough, and I do understand that the district runs aren't available. To that point, members, this is a fiscal bill. It does have a local impact. And it's not that we can't get to the runs, it's just the data is not available yet. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I would make a motion to lay this bill on the table until we have those. This bill isn't going to actually come into effect in 2020 until 2024. So we have some time, and I just think for transparency, that would be a smart course of action. And I'd like to request
Representative Krisha requests a roll call. A motion to lay on the table is not debatable. The clerk will take the roll on the motion to lay on the table. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Clardy votes no.
Clardy votes no. Hewitt.
Hewitt votes no.
Hewitt votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion to lay on the table does not prevail. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bennett moves to amend House Bill number 5, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A14.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. Members, the A14 amendment increases the school lunch eligibility from 185% of the federal poverty level to 250%. The remaining funds, according to this amendment, would then go to the formula to a per pupil increase. And members, the reason we need this, we have DFL policies that have been instituted in our state and our nation that have driven up the cost of everything, from energy to gasoline to just a carton of eggs. And we all recognize that there are some families that have been pushed into stressful situations where students are not able to afford lunch under the current eligibility factors. But members, paying for lunches for every student, kids that can afford it, families that can afford this, that doesn't make sense. That's not the answer. Money doesn't grow on trees. We need to prioritize, and we need to focus on the things that are important. The students that cannot afford lunch are important, and this amendment would encompass those students. The cost of this legislation is over $200 million a year. That's equal to at least a 2% increase on the school formula. Schools are not asking for this. Wealthy families are not asking for this. They can pay for their lunches. I tell you what teachers and parents and schools are asking for. They are asking for lower class sizes. They're asking for help with remedial for reading and for math, to get students caught up, where only half of our students can read at grade level and less than half are successful in math. They're asking for the cross-subsidy help for special education, but they're not asking for a shotgun approach that pays for everybody, even for people who can afford it. So this takes a more surgical approach. This will handle the students who cannot afford lunch. But then it gives the rest of the funds to the schools where they have the local control to meet the needs of students who are struggling in reading and math and other areas. So thank you, members. I ask for a green vote. And I also ask for a roll call.
Representative Bennett requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The means-tested approach to providing lunches has failed. Children are hungry in our schools, and this amendment would not ensure that every child was fed at school. I ask for members to vote no.
Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Would the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Okay, go ahead.
Clardy votes no.
Clardy votes no. Hewitt.
Hewitt, no.
Hewitt votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Knutson moves to amend House Law Number 5, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A15.
The member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise today to present the A15 amendment. This amendment would improve this bill by accomplishing two main goals. One, in feeding the increasing number of kids in our schools that are dealing with food insecurity and being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. I know that now children are struggling, families are struggling in this Biden-Walz economy. The cost of everything is up. Parents are paying more for housing, utilities, fuel, and groceries for home. Too many families are being just left behind. During testimony in committee, we heard repeatedly that a lot of these families are just barely missing the qualifying threshold. Therefore, I propose that we increase that threshold from 185% of the federal poverty level to 250%. This, along with our automatic qualifiers, which are already capturing more of the students that need this, and we'd also be being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. Families are suffering. We do need to feed our children, but we have to do this in a reasonable, fiscally responsible way. I ask for a roll call vote.
Representative Knudsen requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Kreshaw moves to amend the Knutson amendment to House Law Number 5. The amendment to the amendment is coded A20.
Representative Kreshaw.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And members, the Representative Knudsen amendment is very reasonable. And what this amendment to the amendment does is it adds supplemental nutritional aid, because the way the bill is structured is we still have a situation where students can get a reimbursable meal, but they can go back and get more, which gives them the opportunity to do the a la carte, to do extra milk, and still run up school lunch debt. We're trying to prevent school shaming. This gives a supplemental aid so that those schools can make sure any student that comes back into line, that wants to get a second meal, wants to go to the a la carte, and if their parents aren't providing for those meals through payments, the school district will have that capital to cover that. So I would ask for support on this and ask for a roll call.
Representative Kreshaw requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment to the amendment. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I urge a no vote on the A20 amendment. This bill is not about a la carte. This isn't a Gatorade for all meal or an ice cream sandwiches for all bill. This is a bill to make sure that students have an adequate and healthy breakfast and lunch. This is a bill, we know that lunch shaming is a problem, but the problem can be solved by feeding children. We need to make sure that children have food at school. Thank you.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nice job on that. I've been called a lot worse. This amendment is common sense, and this amendment to the amendment is common sense. It increases the threshold because we heard over and over in our committee hearings that families are just missing the threshold to qualify for free and reduced lunch. So by increasing that threshold, we will qualify more families to be able to get the much, much needed support that families need because they are being crushed by some of these economic policies. By including more kids, kids will go back to class and they will be full. I would encourage you to support the amendment to the amendment. I will be voting green.
Further discussion on the Krisha amendment to the Knudsen amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Go ahead. Clardy votes no.
Clardy votes no. Hewitt.
Hewitt votes no.
Hewitt votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
IGO moves to amend the Knudsen amendment to House File Number 5. The amendment is coded A. Amendment to the amendment is coded A21.
The member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment today I'll just explain it quick and then I'm going to get into why we're doing it today. We'll be giving $1 million a year to the Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation to be giving an extra $20 per student in the IRRR service area. The reason we're going to do this today is to make sure we're taking care of an area of a state that's been frankly forgotten. And you'll have to forgive me today, members. I'm a little emotional with what's going on today. For those members that haven't heard, the Hubert Engineered Woods project that was located in Cohasset has decided to leave the state of Minnesota. The third largest outstate private investment in our state's history that was ushered in a bipartisan way in the 21 session has left because of, quote, political headwinds and the inability to permit and make the project come to reality. 150 direct jobs, not including spin-off jobs, and jobs for all of our loggers, a sustainable forest industry, taking care of tax base in a community that's losing a coal-fired power plant due to the rent.
Point of order.
Representative Hollins, please state your point of order.
Madam Speaker, Mason's 101 requires debate to be confined to the question before the body.
Representative Igo, please connect your commentary to the amendment to the amendment. Representative Igo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I was getting there. I would appreciate some grace when I'm talking about this. This is a big deal. I had constituents crying, calling me today about this. I was drawing the point that if we're going to continue to lose projects like Huber and have a mining moratorium put in place in northeastern Minnesota, and we're losing jobs, we're losing tax base for our schools. The kids in my school districts on the Iron Range are going to need more support if there's no jobs for them. That is why this amendment is here today. Have I connected the dots? Thank you.
Representative Igo, were you going to request a roll call?
I am going to request a roll call.
Representative Igo requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Igo, you still have the floor.
Thank you.
Representative Igo.
So in conclusion, if we're looking at this and we're going to continue to lose out, I mean, Minnesota got a black spot today losing that project. I mean, think about that. One of the largest private organizations in the country was going to invest and provide union jobs, union construction hours. They're gone. A mining moratorium went into effect in northern Minnesota, yet the Vice President of the United States come here and says we're going to build electric vehicles, and we're not going to do it with Minnesotan labor and Minnesotan materials. And the Iron Range is going to be left behind. So today, the least we can do is make sure that the kids in my district are going to be fed and taken care of. This extra $20 a pupil has now become necessary due to the policies that have been put in effect in the state. And I would request that everyone votes green to put this on the bill today. Thank you.
The member from Morrison, Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Igo, for bringing your amendment to the amendment forward. Members, there's lots of reasons to support these. One of the reasons that I support this amendment is a former Representative Anzels who I used to sit next to in a couple of committees, and we would talk about this. And one of the things, we had a very heated debate in one of our education committees. And we were on the same side. And he turned to me, and it was a phrase that many of us have heard. He would say, it's wool socks versus silk stockings. And members, this bill moves dollars to the silk stocking parents. The intentions and the provisions in here to do the universal school lunch and to provide for that funding is one thing, and we can get there. But let's not do it by hurting the kids, as Representative Anzels would say, that are the wool socks kids, the kids from the families that come from the hardworking area up north. And so out of admiration for my friend Representative Anzels, I would support this, and I would support it for the people in your district.
Discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Igo, I know that lots of people in your district and lots of people in my district do worry about their jobs. And as we parents do have a lot that they have to worry about. Food and making sure their children are fed at school shouldn't be one of those things. This is an underlined amendment that sends money to Iron Range schools, which is fine, but it also takes away food from those kids who need it too. I ask members to vote no on this amendment to the amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Igo, I do support your amendment. Since my time in this chamber, have the winds changed. Over in this section of the chamber were people who used to fight tooth and nail for the Iron Range in this state. As a matter of fact, we got to learn how one of those members' underwear was made. And today, the Iron Range is being told, you're losing jobs, you're losing funding, maybe someday, but not today. If not but for the Iron Range, this country would not have won World War II. The world would look like a totally different place. We have the chance to do the right thing. And speaking of the Iron Range and northern Minnesota, we have the school trust lands that were set aside at the time this state became a state for the purpose of supporting students and the purpose of supporting education. I'm embarrassed the way that this chamber is starting to turn its back on one of the most powerful resources, not only that this state has, but this country has in the way of the Iron Range. Representative Igo, thank you for standing up for Minnesota, standing up for the Iron Range, and standing up for the people of the United States of America.
Further discussion. The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I too stand in support of Representative Igo's amendment. You know, my first term, I was in the retiring room, and I had a conversation with one of our members, Representative Tom Rukavina. And in that conversation, brought up who my grandfather was. My grandfather was head of the Steelworkers Union. And he went to Representative Rukavina went to my grandfather for his very first job. And Representative Rukavina said, your grandfather would be rolling in his grave knowing that you, Mary Bensoni, well, it's Franson, but my maiden name, are a Republican. And then he drugged me around and introduced me to Representative Ansel's as Peter Benzoni's granddaughter, and Representative Mary Murphy's, this Peter Benzoni's granddaughter. And they all knew my grandfather. And I have family still and friends that are working up in the Iron Range. But today my grandfather is not rolling around in his grave because his granddaughter is a Republican. He is rolling in his grave because the party that he fought for, worked for, delegated for, and was a union worker has abandoned the Iron Range that he loved. And so, members, I ask that you support the amendment that Representative Igo has brought forward.
Seeing no further discussion, the member from
Itasca.
Itasca, Representative Igo, closing argument.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the quick debate on this. I just want to close. I think we always talk about amendments being a gotcha or political. That's not what this is today at all. I want to make sure the body understands that. This amendment came out of the passion I have for my home, for my family, for my neighbors, and my constituents. If we're going to have a state that isn't going to support what we do and put their livelihoods at risk, and it was said, all parents worry about jobs. Well, the jobs in my district aren't being supported by this body or our state. So I came here with this amendment today in full entirety of this not being for a gotcha or a political moment. This is because now I need to start adapting. How am I going to take care of the next generation in my home? Because we're going to lose their jobs and we're going to get rid of their communities. I want to make sure these kids are fed and taken care of. That's what this amendment's going to do today. And this really was a hard day for me. It was a hard day for the range. We just keep taking hits and we just keep getting knocked down. And I'm getting these calls and people are asking, Representative Igo, what are we going to do now? And I think this chamber has realized that I try to be one of the most optimistic people you'll ever meet. But I tell you what, I'm starting to get beat down. I'm starting to get beat down, and so is my district. But we are going to keep standing up and fighting for what we believe in. And in the meantime, we're going to put this amendment on the bill today so we can make sure our next generation stays fed if their parents are going to have hard times because this chamber won't support their jobs. Vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Okay, go ahead.
Clardy votes no.
Clardy votes no. Hewitt.
Hewitt, no.
Hewitt votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. I believe we are on the Knudsen underlying amendment. Discussion to the Knudsen amendment. Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, let's do the fiscally right thing here and vote green.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. This amendment leaves families out. I know it was designed to say, we were talking about how families are being left behind, but this amendment would leave families behind. It would not feed all children in Minnesota. I ask for a no vote.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Clardy votes no.
Clardy votes no. Hewitt.
Hewitt votes no.
Hewitt votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is one more amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Bakeberg moves to amend House Number 5, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded DE6.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I know all families are not asking for this. I know all families, I know all students are not asking for free lunch because over the last 20 years, I've been blessed to work in both private and public education. I've served as a teacher, a coach, a principal, and an assistant principal. And I've had countless conversations with my administrative colleagues, and they don't want this as well. In fact, I've had countless conversations with administrative colleagues in public schools where we've sat and discussed legislation that has come out of this body that has a negative impact on our schools, on our communities, but most importantly, our kids. In my professional opinion, House File 5 falls into that exact same category. Representative Jordan, I appreciate your intentions with this. I truly do. We talked about your passion in committee, and it's evident. But the long-term implications of this bill is why I offer the DE6 amendment. One of the superintendents that I have the pleasure to work with, she tries to wrangle us back in when we're in a heated administrative team discussion with one simple question. And I think it would be really good for our body as a whole to ask ourselves that question. What she says is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I think if we went around this room, every single person would say, we want hungry kids fed. Amen to that. I'll do a raise of hands. Just kidding, I won't do that. I'm sure there's something in Masons that would rule that out. But I'd like to just frame, what does this bill actually do? Representative Jordan did a good job of framing it. It provides one breakfast, one lunch for every student, regardless of whether their family needs that support or doesn't need that support. It provides for all schools, both public schools and private schools, that fall under the USDA guidelines. And the cost of this bill that's been talked about is around $200 million. And just a side note, administrators give each other a high five. Superintendents say, yes, we got 2 and 2 on the formula this year. That's what this amendment does. It gives our schools 2 and 2 on the formula right now, and they can plan and budget.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Tabke, let's let Representative Bakeberg conclude. Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you. What this bill does not do, it does not ensure that every student will be full. It does not do that. I know that because I was in a lunchroom on Monday. I was in the lunchroom on Friday, and kids are saying, I need extra entree. I need a la carte. And kids continue to be hungry because of the federal lunch guidelines. The other question is will this eliminate lunch debt? And the simple answer is it does not eliminate lunch debt. For all of the good intentions, it does not eliminate lunch debt. And that goes back to those USDA guidelines that limit portions. So my growing 16-year-old boy is eating me out of house and home. And I'm sure those of you that have kids feel the same way. So this amendment just offers a different perspective on how to address this issue. We all have the common goal of feeding our kids. This amendment is based on conversations with school staff, with administrators, with teachers, with families, and quite frankly, countless hours supervising a middle school lunchroom, which I think there's a special place in heaven for me because of that. So this amendment, what it simply does is allocates the $200 million onto the general education formula, thus allowing our school boards, our superintendents, the local control to make sure that kids are not only fed, but they are full when they go back to class. This would allow local school districts the flexibility to eliminate lunch debt. One superintendent recently shared that their idea, if this amendment passes, would be to eliminate lunch debt on a quarterly basis because families' incomes fluctuate and it hits people at different times. One superintendent shared that they would wipe it out at the end of the year. The key factor is local control. This is a common sense amendment that allows school districts across our great state to address the unique needs that each one that we have the honor and privilege and responsibility to represent, to do what works best for them. Bottom line, I trust our schools to identify and meet the needs of the local community. I ask for your green vote, and I request a roll call.
Representative Bakeberg requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. State your point of order, Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. Under House Rules 321, motions and propositions must be germane. A motion and proposition on a subject different than that under consideration must not be admitted under guise of it being an amendment. This bill is about school meals and is not in the general education formula. The statute that addresses the general education formula is not in this bill.
I find the point of order well taken.
Madam Speaker,
Representative Demuth.
I would appeal the ruling of the Speaker and I request a roll call.
Representative Demuth appeals the ruling of the Speaker and requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The question before the body is, shall the decision stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or a green vote upholds the ruling of the Speaker. A no or a red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. At this point, we're in debate and not advice. Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so just quickly, as I put this together and with the debating the appealing of the ruling of the Speaker, what this is going to point to is going to be what I'm going to talk to about on third reading, and that is the reason the germaneness argument is up here is because these funds, the argument is these funds are not general fund dollars. And that is precisely one of the problems here. Because those funds aren't going to be transferred back and forth, if this germaneness stands, the argument's going to show the funds can't come back into the general fund. And so we're going to have a problem there to deal with. So I actually, I would debate that we find the Speaker's ruling not well-founded and that we vote against the Speaker.
Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're talking about school funding. We're talking about kids. We're talking about feeding kids. I would encourage you to overturn the ruling of the Speaker, but I think just at a very practical level, our families at home are saying, we're not going to vote on this because it's a hard vote. That's sad. That's sad that we're dodging a hard vote.
Point of order,
sad.
Madam Speaker.
State your point of order, Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, under Mason's 124, motives are not in order.
Members, I'm going to draw your attention to Mason's section 124. There's 2 paragraphs under section 124 that are often used in the Minnesota House of Representatives under custom and usage. Paragraph 1 is, in a debate, a member must confine remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities. And paragraph 3 is, it's not the person, but the measure that is the subject of debate and is not allowable to arraign the motives of a member. But the nature or consequences of the measure can be debated in strong terms. And I would recommend that members familiarize themselves with these sections of Mason's and please avoid either motives or personalities in debate. Further discussion, the member from Dakota, Representative Koznick.
Madam Speaker, I believe Representative Baker still has the floor, but I stand to offer advice to the Speaker on the previous point of order.
Representative Koznick, it is also the custom and usage of the House that when a point of order is first raised on a alleged violation of Mason's 124, that we simply advise the body what Mason's 124 is. So we're not any longer on Representative Long's point of order being raised, and Representative Bakeberg does have the floor if he would like it, but he did sit down, so it appears to be done. If you'd like to debate the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, go right ahead. Representative Koznick, you have the floor.
Well, Madam Speaker, I would and offer additional advice respectfully. We have members that are raising issues and amendments to better the bills that are being presented. And when we're interrupted, we need to remind the body that when a member has the floor, if it's a legitimate point of order, that's fine, but we're seeing a practice where it's not necessarily legitimate and just intended to interrupt the member. And under Section 94, when a member has been recognized, it is a breach of order for another member to interrupt for the purposes except those listed under Section 92. And so we should not be interrupting members just because you don't like what they have to say and it might offend their sensitivities.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Koznick, when I decline to rule on a point of order being raised, it does not mean that it is not a meritorious raising of the point of order. It is the custom and usage of the House to give basically 3 strikes before you're out. And it is also a violation of Mason's 124 for you to surmise out loud why a person would raise a point of order. So I do understand, and members, I think we have to be respectful of one another, and when a member has the floor and they're making a point, we generally try to give folks a chance, but the things we do have to cut off is when we wade into the territory of motives and personalities so we don't get too far down the road and nobody can understand why the point of order was raised in the first place. But appreciate your point of view. And discussion to the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, which is before the body. Representative Long usually goes last. Representative Nelson, I guess, would like to go next. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson M.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't normally rise on these things, but the argument that this is because it's dealing with education, it's dealing with funding for education, and therefore this is appropriate to be amendment. Many years ago, a former House member who went to the Senate argued or put on the floor an amendment that dealt with funding for education. It was, after the bill was passed and signed, it was challenged by the GOP in court and ruled that it was out of order and unconstitutional because while we can put other things on in a committee, on the floor it has to be germane, and it was thrown out of court because it was non-germane. This is not germane. We're talking about foods for kids in schools. We're not talking about the education funding formula, and so therefore I stand to agree with the Speaker and support the Speaker's ruling.
Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just want to point out to the body that this amendment is a single subject of education. The bill is a single subject of education. The amendment is a single subject for funding. The bill is a single subject for funding. This is clearly germane, and so I would ask members to vote to overturn the ruling of the Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will have this discussion many times, I'm sure, on the floor, but just because a bill is the subject of a single committee's area of jurisdiction does not make everything else in that committee's area of jurisdiction germane. And the statute here is section 126C.10. That is the general education formula that is not in the bill, so I ask that you vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker. Will the clerk call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Clardy votes yes.
Clardy votes aye. Hewitt.
Hewitt votes yes.
Hewitt votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the ruling of the Speaker shall stand. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 5.
Third reading, House File Number 5. Discussion to the bill. The member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, today I stand to talk about when I'm out talking to people in my district, teachers, administrations. You know, the one thing that I do hear over and over is that we are having too many mandates on our schools. So we as this legislative body, we feel like we know better. We feel like we are going to press into law, no matter what, our beliefs. And yet, when I am talking to superintendents, principals, teachers, they often say these mandates are really stifling them to be able to do what they want to do, and that is to teach our kids, to have healthy classrooms. So we have offered some amendments tonight. We want to feed kids. I know the rhetoric, we know the rhetoric is to feed kids. Everyone wants to feed kids, so we need to get that straight. But there's always two ways of doing things. There's always more than one way of doing things, and what we're trying to do is to have you open up the ideas and the conversations that there might be a better way. What your bill is doing is, let me give you a couple quotes, sorry. I want to quote, okay, NPR News. I don't think those at the top line are concerned about this. Okay, just hold on, one more. Minnesota Post. I don't know if the richest Minnesotans want this, but we can have that conversation. I'm sorry, need this. I don't know if the richest Minnesotans need this, but we can have those conversations. Those two quotes are from Governor Walz. And if you substitute this for the Social Security tax, that's what those quotes were about. So Governor Walz is saying, why are we giving a tax break to the wealthiest? Those were his quotes. And I submit to this body, why are we feeding kids in Edina or rich areas that do not need this extra funding? We are pushing tax dollars where they're not needed. And this is exactly the rhetoric I'm turning to you that you say we should be against. We have offered reasonable amendments. We have offered to raise it to the 250% level to include more students that were at that level. We cannot continue to mandate bills even though Minnesota right now has this surplus. What happens in 2 years when we're at a deficit situation? Because we dangerously put this into law as a mandate, now the schools and the administrations and the school boards will have very tough decisions to make of what they have to cut. Members, this is not what we want. Representative Jordan, we appreciate your bill. We want to fund kids. I mean, with their lunches, we want to fund kids as well. But let's trust the schools. Let's trust the administrations. Let's trust the school boards. This is reckless spending. Government pushing these mandates, it is reckless spending, members. So this no longer is about feeding children. This is about government saying, I know better than you superintendents. I know better than you principals. I know better than you school boards. This is literally funneling tax dollars to areas and districts that do not need this funding. So all day long, you can say we want to feed children. Absolutely, we want to feed children. We can do it better. We can do it a different way. And I do not want to see the damage this mandate will do down the road to our schools when we have to continue to enforce this. Please, we need to have this go back and redo this so that it's doing exactly what we want to do.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hudella.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'm actually thinking about voting yes in support of this bill. I hope nobody got whiplash over there. You've got a Republican that's thinking about voting yes on this bill, and I'll come back and tell you why in a minute. But it's not because it's a good bill. Oh God, no, let's look at the math on it. So Representative Jordan stated in committee that 1 out of 6 kids in our school are hungry. That was shocking to me. I had no idea the number was that high. 1 out of 6 kids hungry. Nobody wants that in this room. In fact, we should all be a little bit ashamed that it's gotten to that point. So take that 1 out of 6 and convert it to a percentage. It's 17%. It's actually a little under that, but we'll round it up. So 17% of the kids in our schools are hungry. It's shocking. We have to fix it, and we all agree on that. And if we agree on that 17% of our kids are hungry, then it's also true that 83% of our kids are, well, not hungry. But wait, there was another number that was talked about in committee. It was 1 out of 4, or 25%. There's 25% of that 83% of kids that aren't hungry that said, we would use this program. We would use the program. We could use the financial boost. Times are tough. Put us in there. And I agree with that. We can take 25% of those kids where their families make just a little too much money, and we can help them out. So if we take that 25% of the remaining 83% of the kids who aren't hungry, it comes out to be 21%. Again, it's a little under that. We're going to round it up. But we're going to say 21% of those kids, we want to help them out. We're going to take the 17% of our hungry kids. We're going to add another 21% of kids that were just over that mark to qualify, and we're going to get 38%. Now, we give away a lot of stuff in this chamber, right? So I'm going to give away 2 DFL bonus points to bump it up to 40% just for the sake of easy math. So if we take and agree, hey, there's 40% of these kids that everyone in this room wants to help, then it's also true that there's 60% of the kids that, 1, aren't hungry, and 2, don't need our financial help with this issue. And if we take that 60% of those kids and apply it to this massive $200 million a year program, that's $120 million. $120 million of taxpayer money that's wasted. To me, it just doesn't make sense. Because every day I have educators and administrators reaching out to me asking for more money for math and science and reading and programs in the education realm. And it makes me think, how much good could we do in those areas with $120 million? Members, when I walked through the chamber doors for the first time 5 or 6 weeks ago, I thought we were all coming here with some minimal fiscal responsibility to the constituents in the state of Minnesota, not to waste $120 million. Boy, was I wrong. But wait, Representative Hudella, you said that you're thinking about voting yes on this bill, and I have been. I'm really struggling with whether or not I vote yes, and I'll tell you why. I've thought about voting yes because out of the myriad of bad policy that's going to get passed by this chamber this session, this is probably the only bill that's actually going to put cash back in the pockets of the constituents in my district. And God knows they're going to need it on the back end to pay for all these free programs when it's our school districts and our state budget that has the low account balance. But I can't do it. I can't vote yes on this bill because this bill, like the majority of bills that have been getting crammed down our throats in this chamber, this bill is more about the next election than it is feeding hungry kids, and for that I encourage members to vote no.
I recognize the member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hudella, that was excellent. But I only taught first grade math, and I got lost on your math, but it was excellent. So, basic addition and subtraction, members. But anyway, I can't handle that advanced stuff. Members, this bill is a perfect example of government causing a problem and then government swooping in to fix the problem with a huge, expensive program that's not needed. As Representative Hudella said, we can get them that small amount, catch those kids that need it, and that's a huge amount of money that could go to our schools. Give them the local control to figure out where it is needed best, lower class sizes, pay their teachers more, special ed subsidy, whatever is needed. This makes no sense. Instead, we're just saying, oh, shucks, let's just pay for everybody. Members, that's irresponsible. So unfortunately, I want to help students. I would have voted for this had we done it in a targeted way instead of the shotgun effect that it is. I will definitely be a no vote.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Jordan would yield for a question.
Representative Jordan will yield for a question. Representative New Brindley.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Jordan, I was looking over the fiscal note, and it indicates that they're basing the fiscal note on the number of students served in the 2018-2019 school year. And I'm wondering if you know, or if any of us know, if it's knowable yet, how many kids were served in the 2021 school year or the 21-22 school year, the years that the federal government was actually subsidizing school meals for students. Because during those 2 school years, kids had access, all kids had access to free meals. And I'm wondering if we know how many kids were served during that time.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Mr. Speaker, Representative New Brindley, I do not have those numbers. The numbers and food data from those years, because of the difference in federal programs, are not available and inconsistent.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was afraid of that. And right off the bat, I'm really concerned about this fiscal note and the assumptions in the fiscal note because we actually have had a test case. We had 2 school years where every kid was eligible to be served free school meals. And I'll tell you what, I had 2 daughters in high school at the time, and I happen to be a family. I don't pay for school lunches for my kids. They bring lunch from home, and we certainly always have our kitchen and pantry stocked, so my kids get those lunches. However, my kids are not going hungry. However, during that time that the federal government was paying for free school lunches for kids, you better believe my girls had school lunch every single day. And so I am right off the bat really concerned about the assumptions in the fiscal note that are, number one, based on 2018-2019, and the increase is relatively small. And I think just my personal experience shows that when the taxpayer-funded lunch was available, people used it. And I think that you'll have probably near 100% participation rate in this program. I don't know why you wouldn't. And the fiscal note is not anywhere close to reflecting that. And so while we're at about $500 million in taxpayer-funded lunches under this fiscal note and bill, I suspect we're going to see that rise sharply in coming years, and that's not actually going to cover it. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Jordan yield for another question?
Representative Jordan will yield for another question. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Jordan, the fiscal note also indicates that schools will incur costs. There will be a local cost to this. They will have to probably update their point of service tracking system. Schools may have to add a breakfast program. They might not have it now, but they will be forced to do that. That'll entail additional staff that they'll have to add. I'm wondering if you have communicated with any school districts and if you have an estimate on how much this might cost our local school districts.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there are some of these costs, but as part of a question was brought up in a committee asking about technology costs, for example. And those technology costs are part of the reimbursement for the meals. And so the point of this is, yes, schools will be providing breakfast, but that cost will be picked up by both the Breakfast After the Bell program from the federal government and from this program from the school meals.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Jordan continue to yield?
Representative Jordan will continue to yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm a little confused because what I just heard is that the local costs will actually be picked up by the feds, the state, I'm not sure. But the fiscal note very clearly indicates that there will be local costs incurred. So are we being told that actually our local schools will not be incurring any costs?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the data, this is what I have heard from MDE, is that as calculated as part of the reimbursement includes those costs. It's not just the food, it includes labor, it includes technology issues. And so that is the answer that I have gotten from the Minnesota Department of Education. There might be things where I could see, I used to be a cashier, I had training about like when they updated the system for the cashier program, there was a training on how to use the new cash register. So there might be costs associated with that.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess what I'm hearing is that no, we don't know what the local costs will be to our schools. And while I appreciate personal conversations with MDE, the fiscal note is very clear that there will be a local fiscal impact. It says very specifically, schools will have to incur costs to modify their point of service tracking systems. That is a must, they will have to. CEP participation mandates both breakfast and lunch meal service. This mandates that they must serve both. So schools may have to add breakfast or lunch meal service in order to participate in the program, which is going to increase staffing and food costs. So the fiscal note is very clear. So while I appreciate personal conversations, the fiscal note is very clear that there will be local costs to our school districts. And the problem I have with this, of course, is that this is what we like to call around here an unfunded mandate. We don't know what that estimate is. We don't know how much our school districts will be charged or what the expenses will be for them, but we know it's going to happen. You know, we had an opportunity tonight to put this money into the formula, where it would have gone directly to our schools, where they could have made the best use for their students. They could have chosen how to use that money best to serve their kids. And in some districts, that might be through increased spending on school meals. That they might have said, you know what, to create a learning environment for our kids, we need to invest more in school meals. But I suspect that there are a lot of schools who would have said, you know what, this increase in our general fund is going to help us provide additional programming that we can't do right now. It's going to help us provide additional services to our special ed kids that we can't do right now. But we voted against that, and instead of putting that money into the budgets of our school districts and their general funds, we're going to force our schools to use their general funds to meet this mandate, because that's the only way they can do it. School districts are absolutely going to incur costs from this unfunded mandate, and their only option will be to pull money from their general fund. Pull money that is currently paying their teachers, paying for programming. Sadly, it's providing money to their special ed cross-subsidy. And instead of doing those things, they're going to have to pull money from their general fund and use it for this. And we were very excitedly told that this bill is about feeding children. And it is, but here's the problem. This bill is about feeding my children. This bill is about feeding my children. This is not about feeding the kids who need it. If it was, we would have accepted Representative Knutsen's amendment tonight. That would have raised the limit to 275% of the federal poverty line. This would have included a lot more families who actually do need this. And it would have served those families well. But instead, we are using taxpayer dollars to feed my children. And I did some math. The average, according to the fiscal note, is that this will cost about $4 a day per kid, per child in their schools. $4 a day. The average school year across the state is 172 days. That equals $688 per kid per year. I have 2 kids in public schools at the North Branch High School right now. That means that the taxpayers are subsidizing me to the tune of $1,376. That means right tonight, you are giving me a $1,376 tax break. Me. That's my benefit from this bill. And I'll tell you what, I will gladly trade my $1,376 so that my senior citizens, the constituents that I have in my district, my senior citizens can stop paying taxes on their Social Security income. Instead, you're paying me. This bill is absurd. Every single person in this chamber wants to feed kids who need it. Every single member of this chamber would absolutely support raising that limit. Let's raise that limit to 275% of the poverty line. Let's include more kids in this program. Let's do that if they need it. But instead, you're giving me this money. You're telling me that I need a $1,376 payment, that I need that tax relief. Well, I'm here to tell you I will gladly give it up if we can finally take care of the senior citizens in my district who deserve relief on their Social Security taxes.
I recognize the member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Representative Bigbird's amendment was right on the mark. Before I came to the House, I was a school board member for 3 years. The school board that I was on, of course, is Browns Valley Schools. We have about 83% free and reduced lunches, very similar to what we see in Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And this bill does extremely little for those folks that I represent in my hometown. I also represent 9 other school districts, because my district's a little bigger than the state of Vermont, a lot of coverage, not the largest. But those schools want that money on the bottom formula. I've been here for years and years, and we've heard both sides of the aisle argue about that. And that's what makes sense. My schools don't get this money. And Representative New, she gets money, but the students that I teach in my release time at my church when I'm back in the district, most of those individuals are on free and reduced lunch. They don't get the money because they already qualify for it. What we're doing is we're giving money back to the wealthiest suburbs, the wealthiest school districts who already have the tax capacity. We need to get it back to my folks that I represent in 9A, the hard-working folks who needs a tax break because we have seen the Biden-Walz inflation. It is hurting them, and we need to get that money back. I'm a school board member. I was a school board member. I understand the importance of feeding individuals, but this bill does very little for the constituents that I represent and a whole lot for wealthy Minnesotans. Thank you. I would, obviously, I'm voting no.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Becker Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one thing I did want to bring up, because it's been stated a couple times, so I represent the suburbs, and there are plenty of kids going hungry in the suburbs right now. And I see all of my colleagues who represent the suburbs also nodding. So I just want to make sure that we're careful when we say things like that, because there are people struggling with poverty and hunger all throughout our state, no matter what areas we represent. That being said, I went to a school that I grew up in an area in rural Minnesota. I graduated with 35 other people, and our school was, even back then, was one of those schools where enough of us qualified. There were enough people qualifying for free and reduced lunch that they made the decision that administratively it actually made more sense for the whole school to just have free lunch and breakfast. And the sky didn't fall, and families got fed, kids got fed. And again, to bring it back to the suburbs and my constituents, I had a constituent who's watching, who works in one of our lunchrooms in Roseville, who has a child with special needs, who texted me. She's watching the debate, and she wanted to point out there are all kinds of ways that families struggle that make it hard to pay these bills, and they may not qualify in the way that the feds decide who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. But her kid with special needs, she pays out of pocket for all kinds of things that isn't contemplated when they fill out that form. And so I think it's important to remember that the goal here is to feed kids, and you can dance around talking about motives, but I think that really is the goal here. I have watched Representative Jordan really go to bat for this bill for many, many years since she first came here, even before this was really top of mind during the pandemic, and that has been the focus. And so I do want to make sure that we're careful and we listen to her when she talks about the legislative intent with this bill and what we're trying to do. Again, there's kids all over our state who will benefit from this. This doesn't need to be controversial. It doesn't need to be partisan. The money's going for food to feed kids. It's the most basic thing we can do to take care of our people, and I'm excited that we finally get to vote for it today. So thank you, Representative Jordan, and a shout out to all the families who are struggling and will benefit from this. So I'm excited to be a green vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker-Finn, indeed, we do want to feed kids. That is the intent of the bill. What I have trouble understanding is how this bill makes sense from the perspective of you folks, those who are authoring it. I like to pursue debate and engage in communication that has the goal of accurately understanding one another. I think that's important. I think often in our conversations, especially our political discourse, we can mischaracterize what the other person is saying and try to erect these straw men that are easier to defeat than the point the person is actually making. And in this case, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in attacking a straw man. I'm not interested in erecting a straw man. I want to know what the actual argument is. And the reason why I have difficulty perceiving that, and why I think other members on this side of the aisle might have difficulty perceiving that, is that this proposal, this bill, doesn't make any sense from our understanding of your perspective. And what I mean by that is, I've been paying attention to politics for a good long time, as an activist, as a resident, and I'd like to think I understand kind of like the basic premises of what you folks call progressivism and equity and the goal of equalizing outcomes and providing people with the stool they need to see over the fence. Like I've seen that picture, that demonstration of what equity is and what it means and how it manifests. The idea being that if you have a fence that's at one elevation and you've got some folks who can see over it, and then you've got other folks at various heights, some of whom can't see over it, you don't give them all a box to stand on because some of them don't need it. You provide the assistance to the person who requires it. And Representative Becker-Finn, when you say you wish this could be a bipartisan effort, and this shouldn't be a partisan effort, I agree. We all agree. That's why we offered you the opportunity tonight to make it a bipartisan bill by actually, ironically, aligning it with your progressive values. You say you want equity, we gave you the opportunity to do that. We gave you the opportunity to fine-tune this so that it's only providing assistance to those who need it. And I know you care about that because I see you doing that work all the time in our committees, in your advocacy, in your public comments. You're always looking for opportunities to make sure that we're not giving assistance to people who, in your view, don't need it. In fact, Representative Newt Brindley here just offered a great example, the Social Security tax. Now, every one of us, I believe, campaigned on repealing the Social Security tax. But then the election happened, and the outcome was what it was, and suddenly there was this bait and switch, where now we're not going to offer a full repeal of the Social Security tax. We're going to argue over who should get it. There are certain people who shouldn't qualify for a repeal of the Social Security tax. On what basis? Well, on the basis that they don't need it. I mean, that's how particular we see you guys being when it comes to every other proposal. And so this is strange to me. I legitimately don't understand why the opportunity to align this bill with your values so that we could all pass it was rejected tonight. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask if Representative Jordan would yield to a question.
Representative Jordan will yield to a question. Representative Hudson.
Representative Jordan, trying to think of how to phrase this in a way that doesn't seem insincere, because I legitimately want to understand. The point has been made, the dead horse has been beaten regarding the fact that this bill provides breakfast and lunch for families who can afford to pay for that themselves now and do not need this benefit. Do you acknowledge that that is the case?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hudson, I don't understand what you're asking. If the answer is, are we not going to feed children, all children in our schools? The answer is we are going to feed all kids in our schools. We give every kid in our school a desk. There are lots of kids out there that can afford to buy a desk, but they get a desk because they go to school. We give every child in this state a public education. Every child is entitled to that, and I'm proud of that. And as part of that, that means that every child should get a meal in order to have an education and learn and achieve their dreams.
Representative Hudson.
Okay, so I think that was a yes, that we're acknowledging that in fact we're going to provide breakfast and lunch, not a big breakfast or a big lunch because it's going to be dictated by these federal guidelines, to every child regardless of whether or not they need it. So again, I find myself perplexed as to how that aligns with the progressive values, the goal of equity, the idea that we shouldn't be lifting up people who are already there. Why are we depriving people of the pride that they have in being able to provide for their own? And this premise that in order to demonstrate how virtuous we are, we're going to pay for everyone's lunch, we can apply this to literally every product and service on earth. Are we going to see a bill to clothe every child? We probably will see some of these ideas. Like as I contemplate, yeah, exactly. As I contemplate all the potential hypotheticals, some of them don't seem that outrageous. And I'll just pose this as a rhetorical question. I don't expect an answer, and I think you know where I stand on the bill. The rhetorical question is the same question that I asked earlier this week in Children and Families when we were talking about the prospect of erecting a brand new state department, yet another one, bureaucracy to provide for us all. And the question is, what is the functional limit? Is there any amount of money that's too much to spend? Is there any amount of taxes that's too much to impose? I am not hearing any principle from the majority that would suggest that the answer is yes. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. This will be short. Would the author of the bill stand for a question?
Representative Jordan will yield to a question. Representative Anderson.
Representative, every 5 years, the federal government passes a new farm bill, and it's very important to agriculture. But amazingly, about 80% of the funding in the farm bill is comprised of nutrition programs. So it's a big part, the biggest part of the farm bill. And I've heard some rumblings among ag people that as more and more states take on the role of feeding kids in school, I think you mentioned this would be four or five now that are doing this. Have you heard in your conversations with either state or federal folks that there could be a pullback from federal people in the farm bill, for example, or any nutrition programs, farm to school that they have that would indicate less federal participation as more states take on the role of feeding students?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Anderson.
I'm glad to hear that. Just a final comment. Talked to a superintendent this morning, and they're concerned about this in the fact that they encourage families to sign up on free and reduced. It affects some of the categoricals that get compensatory aid. Also heard that the State High School League, in their classifying schools for alignments into their athletic programs, uses a weighted average that does take into effect the free and reduced. So just concerned that as this bill moves forward, that things are done to compensate for that so schools aren't in fact penalized by maybe having parents not sign up as freely as they have in the past for the free and reduced, because it does affect other impacts of school funding.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a couple things that I do want to address. I would like you to draw your attention to House File 1547 that was just introduced and is on our list today. And that is a bill about compensatory education and how we can do the formula in a different way where we still recognize the poverty in the district, but we use a different measure than these forms that we're forcing, you make parents fill out. Not everybody does it. And I think Representative Jordan has addressed these kinds of issues. So obviously this is something that we're very much aware of and working with right now. And right now it's being sent to Education Finance, but it will come to policy first. So my committee will know that we'll get a chance to hear it. But I also wanted to speak about the importance of this bill. And as we've heard Representative Jordan tell us, we know right now 1 out of 4 students is hungry every day. And sometimes we don't know who that student is. It could be a family that's just got careless and forgot to send in the money, even though they can afford it, and that child is hungry. It could be that family that's just outside of the range of qualifying for the free and reduced lunch. And we heard in committee stories about families that were just outside of that range, but they don't have a lot of money. And we know with inflation and the cost of food, that's a lot of families in Minnesota today. And this one testifier, she said, the things that they had to give up and what they had to balance and the loans and the credit cards and things like that, because that's where they were in the life. And it reminded me of when, we were one of those families, because at that time we just had one income. And it was my husband's very low income because he was in a training program, a medical training, a very, very low income. And we had 3 kids, 2 in school and a baby at home. And I was, not working at that time. We did not have any extra money. And every month I knew that we were spending more than we were bringing in. And every month we figured out, where can we draw money? And I cashed out a retirement fund that I had because that was a good choice because we were feeding our kids, we had a nice house, we were making it. So we were one of those families that was struggling, but we never would have qualified because I filled out the form and we didn't make it. I knew the numbers. So I know that there's families like that too. So whether it's just one day, whether you're just outside that range, and even this number that you're throwing out now, the magic number of, we can see these kids getting the lunch, but not these other ones if you make just a little bit more, no matter what else is going on in your life. There's a whole group of kids that they will be fed on a certain day that otherwise might not be getting a lunch. So when I think about this bill, what I think about is that word universal. Every student, every day is going to have access to food. The basics of life. No child will have to miss out. No child will have to be embarrassed to say, sorry, my mom didn't fill my lunch account. I don't have food. Can I get it on loan? No child will ever have to say it because their breakfast is there. Their lunch is there from the time they start in preschool to when they graduate high school. Universal, every day, every child. So this is a bill that I think, underlying it, we actually do want this. We might have differences on what we think is a better way to produce it, but we know that what we're doing today is going to be great for kids in Minnesota now and into the future. So very, very happy to be voting on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Todd, Representative Wiener.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a father, how could I vote against a bill to feed kids? You would have to be a heartless person to vote against a bill if there weren't for one glaring reason not to. And that's simply an $18 billion surplus. We're saying people are struggling, people are hurting. Absolutely. We're 6 weeks into this session. $18 billion sitting there. We're saying we're going to have compassion and help out people who are struggling, and yet we have this pile of money that would help those people out. I would compare this to a bully in the schoolyard who took somebody else's money, and now we're going to give them a little bit back and say, we're compassionate. We're sitting on $18 billion of taxpayer money, and we're saying we're going to give a little bit back to people that need it. We could have done this. We wouldn't have families struggling right now if we had prioritized a bill that would have put that money back into people's pockets. The people who paid that in, the people who are struggling right now, those families that need that money. This bill isn't going to go into effect. It's not going to change anything for a year, if not more. And then will it reach the people that it really needs? Where is our true compassion? We could have done something to help those people out, and we haven't done it. We need to find a better way, and it's not all just one side or the other, one party fighting or the other. But a lot of this ends up being the politics, and that's disheartening. We could have found some better ways, and it's not happening. Bill after bill keeps getting sent through without any amendments, any entertainment of another idea. And it saddens me. These bills affect the people across the whole state, not just greater Minnesota or the metro, but everyone. I would think if we wanted to have true compassion, we could have done something to help these families out weeks ago. And that's not happening. I will vote no against this bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I hadn't planned to speak, but I was listening to the discussion debate, especially when it got to the fiscal note, and there appeared to be some confusion. I used to be treasurer on a school board, and when I hear unfunded mandate, that in reality is cutting funding to my school. If you make me spend money on something that's taking away money from other areas, which a lot of good things are at unfunded mandates, but we're already feeding the free and reduced, and the reduced are now free. You heard before about years ago of the shaming and not, if you forgot to have money in your account. Well, I don't know. Our schools don't have that. You can carry a negative account. You do not deny a child a meal, but maybe I'm misunderstanding your schools and your local policies, but I thought we got rid of that. So an unfunded mandate, hiring additional staff, maybe you need special or different equipment and et cetera to do every, student free, breakfast and this and that. The intent doesn't sound bad, but my school district has been in the bottom of regular school districts for per pupil funding. And every time an unfunded mandate, or in reality, a bill passes that cuts the available funds to educate our kids, that bothers me. So, this sounds good. In reality, is a cut. We're already, the kids that need the food or even kids that forgot to get money from their parents are still getting the meal. And you're confused about the fiscal note, and you don't realize how much money it might be, what we're going to use this year or that year, and guesstimating. That isn't the appropriate way to do budgeting, do bills, take care of a problem. But cutting the school funding for my district got me out of my seat to say why. We already went from free and reduced. A few years ago, reduced became free. We expanded that. I coached youth sports, and I and other coaches, the first practice or two watched, and we noticed if a kid didn't have football cleats, soccer cleats, or court shoes for basketball, and we got together so that they had the shoes. And it's not just, it's less dangerous, and they aren't going to have oopses or trips. It's we didn't want them to feel less than the others. We wanted them to have fun, be part of the group, and play. There wasn't any, mandate. We didn't buy it for every student. We looked at the students that had a need. We came together and covered that need. That's how you help. Not say, we got a lot of money, we're going to just, everyone, free lunches. Well, that is okay, but in doing so, you're cutting school funding for my districts, which I think is short-sighted. So I think this bill, one, you got a fiscal note, you're not really sure. You've got, we don't know how many kids, we don't know how much this will cost, we don't know who will participate. Frankly, we could maybe take a few weeks and actually research and better understand and do it right. What is the year? 24 is the year I, covered in here. I think it's early 23 now. When we rush, we don't understand the fiscal note. We don't know the actual effects and penetration. We discover, it's going to have an unfunded mandate and cut school funding to districts. I think this isn't ready for prime time, and we should not be voting this off the floor. We can do better. We ought to.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. Growing up, many people have heard me talk about my grandmother. We were like two peas in a pod. She was a good Christian woman, good Lutheran, good Swede. And she used to say things like, don't talk about money, Chrissy. It's not polite. Don't complain. Count your blessings. That's what's important in life. And my parents, when they started out, they were very young. My mom was 19 when she had me. And despite the challenges, they moved out into their first home in a trailer park. I lived there in that trailer park until I was 3. And my grandfather insisted that he knew a guy. And there was no way his granddaughter was going to grow up in a trailer park. So we got a fixer-upper in Richfield, emphasis on the fix, and it was enough. My fourth-generation railroad father worked hard, back-breaking labor every day as a carman. And he did that until one day, the physical labor of that job was too much. He injured his back. And when he injured his back, he wasn't able to work. And during that time, my fledgling little family in our little fixer-upper, it was difficult. Money was tight. There were no Christmas presents under the tree that year. And I remember the look of my father's face when he couldn't give a gift to his children. I remember at that same time, we had to do things that we didn't want to do, like applying for government assistance for food. In fact, it's the one argument I remember my parents having. My father didn't want to admit that he couldn't afford to put food on the table. And finally, my mother said to him, "Well, you're going to have to get over it because your children need to eat." And I will never forget the defeated look on his face. But he did it because he had to. And during school lunch, we've talked a lot here about what about if you forgot to bring your lunch money? Well, let me give you an alternative scenario. What if you knew you needed lunch money, but you knew your parents didn't have it? If you knew that you only could ask a little bit of your parents, and you needed lunch money for you and your sister, who's diabetic. She needs to eat. I remember one time lying to my mother about how much money I needed so that I could have enough to make sure that my sister had her lunch tickets and I would go without. I remember doing that distinctly. And I didn't forget to ask her about my lunch money. I knew we didn't have it. So I asked to make sure that my sister was taken care of. My baby sister that I took care of since she was diagnosed at 3 years of age. This isn't just about forgetting your lunch money. This is about families who feel a stigma, right? I was not told to ask for money. And I do remember that if it came worse to worse and I was really hungry, I could go to the lady and tell her that I had forgotten my ticket that day. And she would put me on a list so that I could pay them back. And I remember the fear, the shame of having to go ask the lady and lie to her and tell her that I forgot my ticket because I didn't have lunch money. I remember that. It is something that sticks with me, and it's something I rarely discuss because my grandmother said, you don't talk about money. You don't complain. You count your blessings. You have a roof over your head. You have the good Lord above. You have your family. You don't complain. And I got to tell you, I am certain that there are kids right now, this very moment, who are making the same choices that I made for my sister, debating whether or not they can dare ask their parents for that lunch money. I can guarantee you there are children right now making that same choice. Making sure that our children are getting fed so that they can get a good education, so that they can focus in their classes, so they can be successful. That's not a big ask. It's really not. I just want folks to think about those kids tonight. Those kids who were in the same position I was. debating whether they should ask their parent for the money because they know they don't have it. The folks that might be in the middle, think about those kids as we decide which button we're going to press today. And I'm going to urge everyone in this room, while I've shared my personal shame, I know there are other kids feeling it too. Please vote green.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Zeleznikar.
Speaker, the one thing as I listen tonight to this body of members that I'm kind of shocked is the word shame. And it's like mixing apples and oranges. One body's shaming this body, a body who's saying, can we be reasonable? We want to help the same people you want to help. But I don't want you to help if I don't need the help, because that's not responsible use of taxpayer money. I want the money to go to the people who need it, okay? There's times in my life I needed a hand, but right now I don't. I'm not making a lot of money here, but my kids didn't need to have money paid. I want the money to go to the children who need it. That's not even anything anybody in this body has been arguing. I'm shocked because I hear we need to tax the wealthy more, but yet you want the wealthy to get the meals. Why? The point I would like to see the seniors that don't have money for food get food, that need it too. There are some that need it and some that don't. We're talking about equity, but what equity? We're talking about universal. Universal for who? Universal for seniors who are hungry, that need more money. They're waiting for Social Security taxes to end. They're waiting for families that are middle income are waiting for rebates or whatever we want to call it. We're talking about spending money for the people who need it, period. We're not saying we're against the breakfast and the lunch. We're saying we want it for the people who need it. Why would we spend millions of dollars in an area for people who don't need it? That's not being realistic. That's absolutely not even responsible. And the easy thing to do is spend money. We can do whatever we want in this body. And you can say, yes, this is great, but remember what it feels like when you smile and you do this, because taking away, if you've ever had to take away what you give people, it's not a smile. It's a very hard thing. And I fear this is not sustainable. We have a responsibility to look at what are the needs. Everybody on this side is trying to compromise and say, look, the goal is to give the people who need food. We did food shelves. We talked about food shelves today. You're not bringing food to my house, nor should you. I volunteer at these places. I want the people who need it to have it. That's what we're talking about across the board here. So there is equitable ways to do that. But does it mean everybody should have it? That's not how I would define it. And that's the only reason I'm voting no. I'm for the principle, but not for people who don't need it. That's not responsible. We have seniors waiting to get money. We have health care waiting to get money. And we haven't talked about it. Seniors in assisted living and nursing homes. The list goes on and on. That's millions out of the pool that we could be using for other people that need it. And we're choosing to not do that tonight. Not everybody in Minnesota needs this. Everybody in Minnesota needs something different, and we're going to have less money than to give to the other people that need it. So remember that when you vote tonight. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Members, Mr. Speaker, thank you. This talk about school lunch brings me back to the days when school lunch, in my opinion, was actually good. Remember the square pizzas? The desserts with real whipped cream on top, the cobblers and streusels. And mashed potatoes with the gravy. Oh, and sloppy joes, yes, so good. And I, you know, all the heartstringing stories, we get that. We understand that. Back in the day when I was going to school, there was colored tickets. So if you were on free, it was one color. If you were on reduced, it was another color. And if you were a payer, a full payer, it was another color. So if you want to talk about shaming, which I don't think we had that issue where I was growing up, you know, it was Saginaw, Minnesota, Southern Iron Range, Albrook, graduated with 30-some kids. I mean, we didn't care what color lunch ticket you had. Today, things are a lot different. You can go through that lunch line, and no one knows who is free and reduced or paying. You enter in your little code, and if you're out of money, because I have been out of money many times in my boys' lunch accounts, many times getting that little email that your account is negative X many dollars. And my boys have never been turned away. No child is turned away. I'm in District 206. And at the end, normally there is a benefactor that will pay off that school balance if there is a school balance at the end. So we have come a long way from the quote-unquote shaming. The sadness is the lack of bipartisanship, the lack of being able to work together, the lack of two bodies coming together for a good goal. Because this bill, in its idea, is good. But it is not good policy for us to be giving taxpayer dollars to families who do not need it. It is good policy to target families who may need it. That's what's sad. Because here we all want the same goal, but there's one party that doesn't want that goal of targeting for some reason. Members, there is no such thing as a free lunch. We may have this surplus today, of which most of it is one-time spending money, but those tales are going to haunt us. And down the road, there are going to be difficult conversations being taken place. So think about that as you vote on House File 5.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I can probably guarantee that almost everyone in this room knows what it's like to be hungry. Heck, if you didn't plan ahead for tonight, you might be sitting there in your seats hungry right now. Getting distracted, thinking about the snack bar that might be open. It's really hard to concentrate. I also know that there are members in this body that know what it's like to go hungry. I know this because some of you have been very generous and shared your stories. In committee, we heard those stories too. Stories from our students, our parents, our school board members, our teachers, and yes, our administrators who have asked for this. I hope you all get a chance to take a look at our hearing that we had on the testimony on January 24th in committee. Might be a little enlightening. Our school nutritionist talked about the current system being cumbersome, families aren't filling out forms, and a system that is leaving children behind. The system is not working. Our lunch shaming bill did not work. Just look at the legal aid letter. The amendment you brought up to raise the income threshold does not fix a system that is not working. I would also like to encourage you to actually talk to your school boards and school districts. I know many of you do, and I know I'm very lucky to only have 3 because many of you have dozens, and I'm sorry. I've talked to all 3 of my districts that I'm honored to represent, and they support this bill. I was at a town hall in our community last night, and this was with Representative Kraft, and this was actually the first bill that came up. They all said the same thing. Just feed kids. They need to be in school. They need to eat. This is really not that hard to wrap your head around. Now let's ground us back in reality too, in math, but more importantly in our students. There are about 870,000 public school students in our state, with about 70,000 private school students. I have this on a post-it in my office, so I always remember. Our fiscal note on this bill, as it's been pointed out, is about a little over $387 million in the first biennium, $418 million in the second, to feed our students breakfast and lunch. So let's go with the higher number, and then just the public school students. That is roughly about $230 per student per year for our state to feed every child who wants a school breakfast and lunch. $230, members, that it would cost our state with its economies of scale to feed each and every one of our kids. I would call that a pretty good return on our state dollars. One trip to the grocery store for a growing family is $230. Or for that $230, we could feed one of our students breakfast and lunch every day at school. That really is the fiscal reality and the responsible thing to do. As it's been pointed out on the floor multiple times, 1 in 6 of our students are food insecure. 1 of 4 of those students don't qualify currently for free and reduced lunch. Our kids do not always share their stories. It's up to us as the adults in this room to share their stories and to make sure that every one of our students have what they need when they are in our schools so that they can learn. You know, it's really hard to concentrate on math when you're hungry. It's hard to learn how to read when you're thinking about the lunch you left at home on the counter. Each of our students have unique needs. Each of our students have unique barriers to their education. This bill takes one of those barriers away for kids across the entire state, from Austin to Ely, from Morris to Stillwater. It does not leave any of our students behind. You know what, members? As the adults in the room, the responsible thing is to vote green.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for a good discussion, members. Thank you for a good discussion. Early in my administrative career, I had a mentor sit me down and give me some advice. He said, Ben, the best solutions are always going to be found in hearing different perspectives. I wish I could say I always took his advice over the course of my career. I would have learned, it would have been very helpful if I had done that. Over the last month, in this legislative session, we've talked a lot about, from our perspective, wanting to share and have our perspectives be heard and have them taken up. That's just not happened. I've had conversations with school board members, superintendents, teachers, principals, and some have supported this bill. Absolutely, Chair Joachim, absolutely there are people that support this, but overwhelmingly what I've heard from people that have talked to me is great concern. And I've encouraged them to speak up. I've encouraged them to say, you need to call your representative. You need to submit some testimony. And I think the most concerning thing that I've learned in my month and a half so far here is that many of them have declined to speak up out of fear of retribution. One actually said to me, Ben, I can't say anything because we need to get 2 and 2, referring to the formula. That's concerning. Rigorous debate and discussion is not a bad thing. It's actually the sign of a healthy, vibrant community. Based on my experiences and my perspective, the work we have been doing in this legislative body is not going to produce the results that could be as good as possible for Minnesotans, because only one perspective has been heard. And I think this bill is an example of that. Right now, it's been talked about, we have a historic budget surplus. This will not always be the case, and this is my biggest concern with this bill in particular. Because over the course of my administrative career, I've had to sit across the table and tell a teacher who has dreamt since he or she was a young child about being a teacher. And I've had to tell them that they don't have a job because of budget reductions. No fault of their own. They were amazing teachers. But I had to tell them they were cut. That's gut-wrenching. None of us in the room would want to do that. My concern is that this bill will have the unintended consequences that I talked about previously. In the future, in the tales that was referred to, that principals across the state, superintendents, and school boards will have to make those difficult decisions to reduce staffing levels. This doesn't have to be the case. I'd encourage you to vote no today. Let's roll up our sleeves and find some bipartisan support to not only feed our kids, but to ensure that they are full when they go back to class. And let's address the issues that we've talked about so we're not tying the hands of our school districts in the years ahead. Thank you. Vote no.
The member from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And a couple of things that I'll start with. Congratulations, Representative Jordan. You'll have the votes. You'll pass this bill. And to Chair Joachim, who's given us respectful debate, thank you. We're starting with a bill that we all agree with and an idea of handling how we feed kids. There's no disagreement there. Where the disagreement comes in is how we do that. And it's the details that need to be discussed. And passing this bill will not stop the generosity. There will continue to be generosity. And there's some other things that we should talk about with this bill and passing it. A couple of other things that we should bring up right away is one of the problems that we face in this is not that schools aren't feeding kids, because they absolutely are. The 2021 bill of school shaming, and if you go to the Ellison ruling on that, schools cannot turn kids away. And you can talk to school after school after school, they are not turning kids away from eating. That is not the problem, okay? One of our problems is the UFARs and the categorical system. It's the way we send the money to schools that is one of the biggest problems. This bill and how we do this and how we try to solve getting dollars out for lunches is going to exacerbate the categoricals and the reserve funds, and we're going to tie the hands of schools. A couple of things to talk about, and if you'll bear with me, I just have to get through my notes. We're in a contest of ideas. Okay? And the idea here that we're debating is how best to disseminate dollars, because what government does is it takes taxpayer dollars and it distributes those. That's all this bill does. And we're saying that it's important enough to distribute those dollars in a way that we give schools the ability to pay for those lunches. There's no disagreement there. However, we're in a zero-sum game. It's a vacuum system. The dollars have to come from somewhere, and they have to go somewhere. They don't just disappear. They don't come in and magically go somewhere. So the way this works, members, is the federal government pays part of the dollars, and the parents pay the other part of that. And we've had some parents who don't pay the obligation. There's lots of reasons for that. There's no judgment on that. It's just a way it happens. It's a fact. Schools have deficit spending, and by law, they cannot carry that deficit more than 12 months. So a school district that has a deficit spending in their school lunch account must resolve that within 12 months, or the dollars come out of the general fund. Okay? Absolutely, if you go to a school board member or a school administrator and say, hey, we're going to send you dollars for lunches, they're going to say, yes, that's a great idea. But now let's get to the details. If I say to them, I'm going to put strings on those dollars so you can only put them in this fund, and if you have a surplus, you can't touch them, they're going to say, well, wait a second, I have no flexibility with that. I have talked to school districts. I am very familiar with the UFAR system. And let me walk you through a couple scenarios. I talked to one school district just this week. They have about 2,500 kids. They're in the 28% free and reduced bracket. And I said, where is your school lunch balance? And that's the question. When you talk to school board members and you talk to superintendents, ask them, where's your school lunch balance at? And the school said, we have $1 million in our school reserve, our school nutrition account. $1 million. 2,800 kids. And I said, what was your deficit last year for your lunch account? $15,000. They had parents and accounts and families that didn't pay $15,000. That was it. They were carrying a $1 million reserve balance that cannot be used for anything else other than the nutritional side. It cannot go to teachers' pay. It cannot go to hiring. It cannot go to reading programs. It cannot go to any of that. It must stay in the school nutrition. So they have a $1 million balance that they cannot touch. And by the way, if you're in statutory operating debt, you can't use that money either. They had a $15,000 deficit. We could have solved that problem for them by putting the money on the formula and letting them move the $15,000 to their lunch account, which zeroes it out. And let me walk you through the numbers. And I appreciate us talking about the fact that we don't have runs, but we have a formula. And if we have a formula, we can walk through this. Members, that school district, let me tell you the difference of this. This is where the devil's in the details. That school district, when I ran the numbers, and I ran them from school districts of 1,000 kids to 40,000 school districts, all the way over to 62.5% free and reduced. A school district with 3,000 kids at a 30% free and reduced level gets $944,000 and $944,112. Okay, so what has happened is that school district is going to get $944,000 that will supplement and pay the parents that were already paying into that school, and it's why it's carrying a $1 million fund balance. Okay, so it's going to get $944,000. The parents aren't going to have to pay for the lunch or the breakfast. They're going to get one reimbursable. That's great. But there's no flexibility to that $944,000. Now, if we put those same dollars on the formula, same school district, same formula dollars, they get $945,000. If you take $15,000 of that, simple back of the envelope math says you have $930,000 that go back to your general ed formula. So you allow the local taxpayers that want to continue to pay for their lunches. There are plenty of parents out there who will pay for their lunches, and they're happy to do so. They have no problem doing that. But we're taking this out of their hands, and you're tying the hands of the school district on the flexibility of the dollars. The solution our amendments did, the solution that we offered, were not a no, they were a yes and. Let's take this idea and give school districts more flexibility. Why? Because members, I've been here, many of you have been here in previous years. I was here when I was in the back room fighting for $250,000 on the target. I remember fighting just to get up to $400,000 on the target. Those days will come again, members. Those days will come. And we could, at Representative Jordan, you could put dollars on the formula and still accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, which is every kid gets one breakfast and one lunch. That is absolutely accomplishable. And the school districts, talk to your school districts. You will not find any school district out there that will say, I don't like this idea because I don't want to put food in front of kids. That is not out there. There is 0 school districts, there are 0 administrators, there are 0 school board members who don't want their kids to not have meals. That is, I guarantee you, you can call every single school district. There isn't a single person out there that wishes to say, please don't send me these dollars because we really want to withhold meals. That is not the case. And in fact, we have a 2021 bill, and we have an AG ruling, and we have federal requirements that they can't even do that. Members, we talk about fair funding for all of our students. We talk about better pay for our teachers. We talk about literacy learning and the reading reset. We talk about the low reading literacy rates and the mathematical scores. We talk about local control and the parent empowerment. Parents want to pay their bills. The majority of parents, when you talk to them, they will pay their lunch bills. Those that can't, we have a program for that. And in fact, when you run the numbers on this, what happens is a negative correlation where school districts that have lower free and reduced counts get more state aid. If you are on the higher side of free and reduced, you already get the federal funding. Those kids are already covered. But if you're on the lower side of that in a larger school district, we are giving relief for the parents and the wealthy parents that can already pay for this. I don't know why we would do that. They've already said, I will contribute. And many of those parents are willing to even pay for their neighbors that go through hard times that can't. So why would we take the tax base? Why would we take that from the local communities that are saying, I'm willing to pay a portion of this? Why would we take that away, redistribute it, and take that source of revenue away and tie it into a school nutrition account that we can't use for other things? I don't understand that. When there's dollars that are available that we could put on the formula. A couple of other things, members, as we talk through this. So, Representative Bakeberg talks about what's the problem? What are we trying to solve? Well, at the end of the day, we're trying to make sure there's enough money so that the lunch programs are funded. That's really what this is. But here's a number of points that have been brought up that aren't being solved, but they get talked about in the peripherals. Number one is some students have food insecurity. What is food insecurity? It's a condition of not having access to sufficient food or food on an of adequate quality to meet one's basic needs. I don't think there's any disagreement that food insecurity be bad. In fact, story after story, we can probably all reach back to points in our lives where food insecurity was an issue. But food insecurity at its basic level is not solved by schools or caused by schools not feeding kids. Food insecurity comes
Members,
from
please take your conversations off of the House floor into the alcoves of the retiring room. Thank you.
That doesn't include me, right, Madam Speaker? Food insecurity comes and falls disparately against non-white students. So our black students and our other racial demographics have higher food insecurities. And where do those food insecurities come from? When you look them up and you look at many of the sources from them, children are more likely to face these difficulties when they come into families with high incarceration rates, poverty, and not two-parent families. those children tend to have higher food insecurities. So this will not take that away because it can't solve those problems. Okay? Black children are, according to the Economic Policy Institute, black children are 6 times more likely to attend a high poverty school as compared to white students. That is a fact. And we are taking money and putting it into schools that are high white students, wealthy families. We're taking state aid out of those schools and we're redistributing those to school districts that frankly don't need it through this program. There's other ways of doing that. Okay, we talked about lunch shaming. This doesn't solve lunch shaming. If you look at the way the bill is written, a student is allowed a breakfast and a lunch refundable meal. Okay, so you get 1 breakfast, 1 lunch. And those portion size, if you look at the portion size, are small. Okay. I have 2 kids left of my 5. I have a sophomore and a senior who are Nordic skiers, and let me tell you, the calories those kids take in is unbelievable. The portion size will not get those kids through the day, through practice, and so forth. So they're going to be back and they're getting a second helping, or they're going through the a la carte. The problem is this: if I have 2 students, if student A comes to get their reimbursable meal and they get their first meal and they go back to get a second meal and they do not have money in their lunch account, they get turned away, which is against the law. The law says that a kid that has a negative balance cannot be treated differently than a kid that has a positive balance. But this will not fix that. There will still be negative balances. And we should take care of those. That kid that cannot pay that lunch bill that has a negative balance should not be turned away from any reason. But we know that food service programs, in order to survive, if you have a 0 lunch balance, that student will not be allowed to get the second meal or to get the a la carte. But if we put this on the formula, the schools could be more flexible. They could do what they want with it. School employees should not be in the collection business. Some parents don't pay their lunch bills. I think it's terrible that those that can pay that don't. And yes, we all know there are families that disregard this and just say, you know what, I'm not going to pay it. I don't know what the reasons are. I will tell you, I disagree with many of them that I've come across because I used to work in the schools. I used to work in the POS systems, and I was very familiar with those families. Now, it was easy to say, well, I know they can afford it, but they didn't. And the fact of the matter is, schools are still going to be in the collection business. Schools are still going to be chasing down accounts because you can go back to the a la carte line and you can go back and get a next meal. There won't be any reduced paperwork. You've got to file with the CEP. And the last thing is this: we should be reducing disparities in the school formula. Representative Jordan, your idea is on point. And again, congratulations, you're going to have the votes, this is going to pass. You could make this way better by giving the schools the flexibility to put this on the formula and allow them to move the dollars as they need fit to take care of the needs of the kids and the balances. Because a school district that has $1 million in the reserve fund and a $15,000 deficit, they're also struggling right now for paras, subs, and teachers. And they've got $1 million they can't touch. So, Representative Jordan, great work. I know what it's like to be on that side. I know how hard it is to be in the majority and the work that comes with getting the votes, and you've accomplished that. I just wish we could take this a step further. I wish we could add more flexibility. And I think that the schools would applaud that, and you'd have a whole lot more support. But I can't vote for this bill in this form because it ties the hands, and those legislators that are going to be sitting in these seats in the tough, lean times are going to have to make decisions about how they move these dollars. when we wouldn't have to do that. So for those reasons, I'll be voting no.
The member from Stearns, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. Members, tonight we have heard a lot of passion, a lot of feelings, a lot of opinions on this bill, with some pretty big promises and some pretty big expectations. In the committee, when the bill was heard, it was referred to as the everything bill, because feeding a student solves so many of the other problems in our schools. And while that is true, to some extent, I don't think this bill is what actually will fix that. And I think of what my grandmother and my mother always said: money doesn't grow on trees, and there is no free lunch. But beyond the rhetoric, however, is the reality. So I want to be honest about what this bill is not going to do, what it doesn't accomplish. This bill is not going to end the practice of lunch shaming, which shouldn't happen. But kids are still going to see the other kids who have the financial means to afford those extra food or the extra a la carte items. This bill is also not going to end unpaid meal debts, because students somehow might still find that way to rack up meal debts through the a la carte or the extra food purchases, especially when the federal meal provided is either not to the student's liking, or it's too little to satisfy the hunger of a growing child. And I know Representative Kresha talked about his students that are alpine skiers. It reminds me of when my last two kids were in high school. My daughter had finally graduated, so I'm thinking, great, I'll put money in my son's account, and it should last for 2 months instead of just the one. But at 17, my son was 6'4" and an athlete. And so when we ran out of money, instead of 2 months in the account and it was 3 weeks, I said, what are you doing? He's like, I was starving and I needed to eat extra a la carte, and my sister was gone, so I just went ahead and used what I thought was hers. And so those meal sizes and the calorie count isn't right for all kids. Also, members, this bill does not ensure that no child is hungry. The bill doesn't send home food at night or over the weekends, but during committee testimony, we heard about the inspiring comments from nutrition workers that provide those take-home meals or snacks, but this bill doesn't cover that. This bill does not end school nutrition program cost overruns. The state aid only covers the difference between the federal fee and the federal free meal reimbursement and the actual federal reimbursement for each meal. If a student meal debt is still accruing or reimbursement rates don't keep pace with the food prices that we know are escalating and other program needs, that cost is still needing to be accounted for. So to be clear, what this bill does is provide a federally reimbursable school meal for every child, regardless of whether the parents need or even want that help to feed their children. I can understand why the majority wants to provide free meals for all students, because we've seen how the failed economic policies of the current administration have pushed too many hardworking families to the brink. Families are struggling to make ends meet with the higher prices at the grocery stores and at the fuel pump and our electric prices. Too many families are on the edge of eligibility for qualifying for free school meals under the current guidelines. And as we heard Representative Pryor talk about that testimony in committee, where parents were using credit cards and trying to get what they needed because they were so close, but they didn't quite qualify. Well, members, tonight we had an amendment from Representative Knutson that would have actually answered that. We offered other amendments to find common ground to feeding children in households of need. Yes, as we have seen, though, time and time again, bill after bill on the House floor, our amendments are rejected. Our offers of compromise to help were again rejected. So if I were to support this bill, One reason might be that the majority has finally put a proposal on the floor that treats all of our kids the same, including our kids in private schools and including those kids in the private religious schools. We don't yet know how much money each school site is going to get, but our estimate is that private schools are going to receive around $35 million over the next 4 years. But I'm not going to be supporting this bill tonight. I do look forward to watching my DFL colleagues vote to send public funds to private schools to end that misconception that public funds for non-public education is actually a threat to public schools. So members, I am urging a no vote on this bill this evening. We have an opportunity to expand current meal programs to help more families that are suffering under a disastrous economic policy and provide more funding to empower school districts to improve instruction, to pay our teachers and our staff better salaries, and to address the needs of students. So members, tonight, vote red.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, when kids eat, they learn better. We know that that is true. That's demonstrated by research. It's demonstrated by common sense. If you're hungry, you can't learn. And I think we all agree on that principle. I'm glad to hear tonight that we all want to feed kids. Let's just think a little bit about our current approach. Our current approach is that we have a stigma for kids who are labeled as poor and who can't pay their lunch. Our current approach is that schools have to chase families for unpaid fees. We've had some conversations on the floor tonight which made it sound like we don't have any funding going to school meals, but that's not true. We do. They are heavily subsidized right now. The school meal cost right now is paid 21% by the state, and there's also significant federal investment. So would our colleagues across the aisle like to wipe out those supports too? Should we increase school meal costs? Should we get rid of the 21% support that the state pays and the federal support? Or we just want schools to be a little expensive for some people, school meals? We have heard some conversations about wanting to increase meal size. Well, great. Maybe we can have that conversation and make sure we're feeding all our kids the right amount. But the meal sizes in here are designed for nutrition value. They are designed for what kids need. The a la carte conversation is about having additional candy bars, having additional Gatorades. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about meals that are targeted at feeding kids so that they can learn. We make decisions all the time about what should be included in education or not. We value public education. We have made it a free public service. We say that exercise should be included. We say that music should be included. We say that you shouldn't have to pay for paper towels in the restroom. Why not meals? We know that meals help kids learn. There is a direct correlation between feeding kids and the learning that they are doing in the classroom. We've also heard, nobody's asking for this. Well, that's not true. Health providers are asking for this. Blue Cross Blue Shield supports this. Allina Health supports this. Our corporate friends are asking for this. General Mills, Land O'Lakes, and Cargill all support this. Our community partners are asking for this. Second Harvest Heartland, Hunger Solutions Minnesota. The Minnesota School Social Workers Association is asking for this. Local Public Health Association is asking for this. The Minnesota Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is asking for this. This is a bipartisan bill in the Senate. I'm hoping it will be tonight in the House. Who testified against the bill in committee? Nobody. Nobody. We had all of this support, no opposition. So what do we get with this bill? We get a guarantee that we will have no hungry kids. We get eliminating, chasing down families and the administrative burden that that puts on our school districts. We eliminate debt shaming. And most importantly, we get rid of the stigma for poor kids. This is about dignity for kids. When we send kids to school, we treat schools as the great equalizer. We are treating all kids the same, giving them all the best quality education that we can provide as a state. And yet, some of those kids know that they're treated a little differently, that they are not quite as good as the other kids there because they can't afford their meals. That is worth a lot to get rid of that. We heard a lot about other school needs tonight, special education, funding formula, paras, mental health, great. We'll bring those up soon. I hope you vote for all of it. We're going to be funding all of those priorities tonight, this session. But today, this is about making sure that kids get to eat because they will be better learners, better students in the classrooms, and I hope that everyone will join us in voting green.
The member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members, for the discussion. It was great to hear from many of you. And we heard a lot of testimony on this bill and on hunger in our schools. And I want to make sure that you all hear from kids who are the ones asking for this. Our children are asking for this. And here's what the kids themselves have to say about hunger and food in their schools. Here's one. There are many, these are all from children in our public schools here in Minnesota. There are many families and students who can't afford to pay for their lunch. I know there are resources available, but it's not enough. Here's one. I shouldn't have to be hungry because I don't have money. Another student said, you can't focus in school with an empty stomach. Another one, students can't function without food. They need to think and focus in class. Students need nutrition to participate and learn. Not everyone can afford food. It will help people learn better and help relieve so much stress. And then here's the last one, and I have a whole stack of them, but I'll leave you with this one. My family already struggles with food. We have WIC, food stamps, everything. Free lunch is helping me out, and without free lunch, we would struggle. We need this for everyone. Thank you. These are from students that are asking for this for themselves. They're asking for this for their parents. We heard testimony from a student whose mother gave him food that day and said, this is all the money I have in my bank account. And he acknowledged that he was testifying in our committee that day. And his mother went hungry that day because she gave her child money for food. Members, this bill really is about feeding children. You can talk about how we need to feed children, and this is an opportunity to actually put that into action. Members, this is fundamentally a bill about feeding children, but this is also a bill that closes those educational gaps. This is a bill that helps students with their behavior. It's a bill that is important for literacy. It's a bill that will help us with chronic absentee problems. But members, this is fundamentally a bill that is about feeding kids. It's a bill about happy and healthy families in Minnesota, and it's about making sure that all of our kids can learn. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill.
Final passage.
You're on it now?
Yeah.
Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Clardy.
Clardy votes yes.
Clardy votes aye. Hewitt.
Hewitt votes yes.
Hewitt votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.